So anyway, second time. Good evening, everybody. Nice to see you. It's been a little bit of time. I've been traveling a bit, so we had some bit of a gap. We're trying to do these once a month, I think. And the present one is a depressing, depressing topic. It's actually not really a depressing topic. It's actually, just it's on depression, but it's also something that I think is very tangible, and it's not too obscure. You know what I mean? It's not like we could talk about, something very philosophical, that would be much more obscure. And I think it's tangible because practically everyone knows, even you might not be able to define what depression is. It's like, you know it when you see it, right? So we're actually going to do 2 nights. So the next one will also be, and I don't remember the date. It's not too long from now. I mean, it's a month from now. So the goal in these talks is to create less of a gap between Buddhist thinking and what is really happening for us. And then we think about us as, it's hard to say Westerners because, modern people, the modern world. And so, as I've said many times, the Buddhist teaching is really important. It's kind of the mission for me, is to be able to communicate these ideas so that people realize that they're not exclusive to ancient times. They're not exclusive to an Asian audience. Okay, these are universal principles, and as universal principles, they apply to us. They apply to any culture, probably. Particularly for us in a modern culture, an educated culture. It's not that you have to be an educated culture for Buddhist ideas to take root, because if you're a faith-based culture, then they found their way into adapting to more faith-based cultures. I think of Sri Lanka, for example, maybe. And then intellectual cultures, it would slip, it morphs into it, okay? So as we know, or maybe we in this room know, but I think for the larger population, it's extremely important to educate people that what Buddhism is a psychology, okay? It is... there are 3 collections. There's all the teachings of Buddha, who taught for over 40 years. Unlike Christ, who only taught for, I think, 3 years, from what we know. But in Buddhist time, he taught for 40 years, and everything was committed to memory. It wasn't so. It's hard to commit to memory, but we have to remember, 40 years, he wasn't teaching something different every day. So his disciples who lived with him and traveled with him were hearing similar. Well, they're hearing the similar teachings all the time, so they could codify them and put them into, eventually commit them to writing, but not for a couple hundred years later. I think 500 years later. So the collection of the teachings, they often codify them into 3 different categories. Now, one of those categories is very clearly, so when we talk about the teaching, these are, what the Buddha taught himself is one whole set of those 3 baskets, they call them. And those are something like 100 volumes long. I don't know how long a volume is, but it takes a long time to read them. In fact, they say that, often in the monasteries, the monks will recite it's called the Kongyur, the whole teachings of Buddha, they'll recite them as a means of blessing. And I think we calculated that if it would take a monk about 24 hours a day, I think 40 days to recite the whole Kongyur. Now, I don't know if that's correct or not, but that's something we're estimated at one point. That's a lot of writing, or that's a lot of teachings. Of those 100 volumes, and that's not including the commentaries. Now, the commentaries, which were written by all the different scholars and practitioners and contemplatives, of that era, not that era, but over hundreds of years, are another, a couple hundred volumes, I believe. Okay, So, people, pundits, scholars like Nagarjuna and Aryadeva, those kinds of figures. So, what Buddha taught himself, clearly one of those collections are really, we could say, purely psychology. Another collection is what's called the wisdom teachings, and those, in a sense, are also psychology. Not in a sense, but those are psychology. And then the third is more having to do with behavior and rules and ethics and morality and those kinds of things. Which, of course, why do you have rules and ethics and morality? Why? To tame the mind. So it all goes back to psychology. It's all related to psychology. And we have ethics in this modern culture, but it's usually associated with what? Maybe laws. It's behavior, but it's not linked with how to have a healthy mind. I don't think. Maybe I'm wrong. I never thought about this. But our ethics, I think, are more designed about how to have a healthy culture, probably, right? An acting culture. So I just wanted to, lead with that preamble that when we study Buddhism, we're studying the mind. Okay? Now, if we look at faith-based parts of Buddhism, like circumambulating stupas and doing water bowl offerings, those are all cultural. Those are designed culturally for the most part. So Japan will do things culturally different than Tibet and Sri Lanka. They all have their cultural applications, and we're going to have our cultural applications. So maybe, maybe we won't prostrate. Maybe we'll get on a treadmill. I don't know, or maybe we'll garden. I don't know, but it has to carry the purpose inside, So all those rituals, all those practices are still designed to train the mind, tame and train the mind. It's interesting. Even circumambulating, prostrations, water bowls, all those rituals, if they're not working to train or tame the mind, they're probably not all that virtuous. They're not all that religious, whatever you want to say, spiritual. There's not the mental component linked with it. Now, of course, someone could be doing things out of faith, and it makes the imprints that later on, right, those habits, so to speak, those imprints, those habits, will be habits that will be worthwhile, in the future, right? As opposed to, if we have a habit of getting in our car every day and getting to work as fast as we can, right? Which means aggression is probably going to come up, competitiveness. That creates imprints too. So that creates habits in the future, mental habits. So going around a stupa, and even if you might not have a big motivation around it, it has some effect, even that. It's different than driving a car on Highway 17, rushing over here and getting slow people in the fast lane, things like that. Everyone knows one of my pet peeves, isn't it?
How depressing.
It's really depressing. So let's talk about depression. So that's where we're going, because whenever we're talking about, so I think it's maybe a disclosure of mine, something that I'm working with. Okay. My challenge is the mission that Lam Yeshe, I felt, gave to me, which was, one thing he said is if you need to be able to explain these ideas to your mother, right? And I often quote Einstein, who said, if you can't explain these, he's talking about his ideas, his theory. If you can't explain a complex idea simply, you don't understand it. I love that. Lam Yeshe was a master of that. If you ever get a chance to watch some of his teachings, there's not a lot on video, but there's none. It's unbelievable. He was just fully committed to communicating. Lam Yeshe was the founder of this organization. My root teacher, who passed away in 1984, and the teacher of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, who's now the head of the organization, a very, very, very accomplished person also, like Lam Yeshe. practitioner. I mean, they're unfathomable, actually, but I won't go there. That's faith. Or is it? Okay, so depression. Let's talk about it a little bit. So depression we often talk about in terms of modern psychology. We use the DSM-5. Any therapists here, psychologists, social workers? Oh, good. Good, yeah, dandy. Okay, so you know about have you all you diagnosed clients with? Yeah. Okay. So this is not a class on, of course, modern psychology, but it's good to have that because that's the word that's used, right? Depression, by the way, is not a word in Buddhist psychology. Isn't that interesting? Doesn't show up. So you have to kind of extrapolate what it is. And of course, it is there explained in Buddhist psychology, but that word, or the Tibetan word, and the Sanskrit word aren't there. Think about that. Interesting. Nor is guilt, by the way. Okay. And the kind of guilt that, we do. That sinking guilt that we do. Obsessive guilt, whatever you want to call it. So as we know, for people who aren't familiar, so it's in the DSM-5, which is the diagnostic statistical manual. So when you're doing diagnosis, particularly in a medical setting, I was an intern at Children's Health Council at Stanford for years, and I had to do all the diagnosing. And so you have diagnosis. There's 5 different diagnoses that you are supposed. If you do full diagnosis, you give 5 different categories of diagnosis, and it's very interesting, isn't it? It's like sometimes people feel good about a diagnosis and some people don't feel good about a diagnosis because it helps some people explain, that's what's wrong with me. And that can be useful. It's less mysterious. Particularly, I worked in the attention deficit disorder clinic for a long time, and parents would bring their children there because they believed their children were ADD but didn't get the diagnosis. So they wanted to get it. Because if you get it, then right? Why would they want to have it?
You get school programs.
Yeah.
Help at school.
Special ed.
Yeah.
And they don't have to take time tests for things like that. I wish I had it when I was. It's not fair. And then the other side were the parents. This is a smaller side whose children were diagnosed, but they didn't want them to be diagnosed, so they came to get it. Second opinion. And this place was very robust in its assessments. Very, very. Take weeks and weeks and tests. But we used to interview. So my supervisor was sort of a rebel. She was like a hidden rebel. And because I didn't really like that whole medical model, that pathologizing, the labeling. But I went there because another supervisor, my mentor, said, you need to go there. You need to understand that stuff. You can't just reject it because you're new in this field. I get it that you don't like it, but it's better if you really know it. And then you're sort of informed as why you wouldn't want those labels. And I think that was very, very wise. It was hard because I had to do all the diagnosis every week, a couple cases a week. And so, my supervisor of the ADD clinic was very enlightened, very, very progressive. She didn't like the label. And so we were she was actually a narrative therapist, as I was a budding narrative therapist, non-pathologizing. Not going to go into what narrative therapy is, but it's a non-pathologizing approach to working with problems. The problem with narrative therapists, they don't believe in they don't promote a psychology at all. They don't care because they have reasons political reasons why they don't. But anyway, so what we did is we used to interview some of the children because we felt we needed to understand ADD or ADHD, and who are the experts? The kids. So I remember this one 7-year-old, 8-year-old, something like that. We were interviewing, and we said, could you please, for a short time, could you be ADHD? So we want to interview ADHD, but we don't know how else to do it unless you're familiar with it, right? He would say, yeah. So can we interview you, and you are ADHD, right? And he got it, right? I don't remember the whole interview. We used to film him and watch him and all this. But what I do remember, we're asking him, what is it you want as ADHD, right? What does ADHD want? He said very clearly, attention. I don't get enough attention. I have a deficit in attention. Interesting. Attention deficit disorder. I thought that was interesting. So depression is a different story. We should interview depression too. We should. It'd be very helpful. So when in the diagnostic manual, it's a very long section. It's a section of its own. Depression is its own category. It's a mood. Used to be in the mood disorders. Now it's just depression, depressive disorder. So there are many different diagnosable forms of depression. If you're going to, people come in, you deal with people. They may have a major depressive disorder, disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. That's you're disruptive because of a depressed mood. Okay, persistent depressive disorder, dysthymia. It's not as deep. We know. So you think about that. Like, do you know people that just they're in a funk for a long time? But they're functional, or maybe you have been that way. That's what's referred to as dysthymia. You see, I'm kind of depressed. That's the dysthymia. That's probably the most common one. There's conditions in all these. You can't just there's a lot of conditions to meet the diagnosis. And then premenstrual dysphoric disorder, substance medication induced depressive disorder. That one's interesting. People or like postpartum disorder, depression. So there's a lot of variables with these, and I'm doing this because I feel we have to cover it, so we have the same idea. Then there's variables to depression. So there's depression with anxious distress and mixed features, melancholic features. Now, melancholic features, they're seasonal. Where's that? Is that on the towards the bottom? Seasonal pattern. People just get depressed at a certain season, or get depressed, when that time of year maybe their parent passed away or something traumatic happened. And they just, people say, I get depressed at Christmas. So that's seasonal. Okay? I like the one with catatonia. I'm kind of thinking, how are you depressed if you're catatonic? I mean, how do you tell somebody? How do you know? Sorry. Okay. I'm not a very good therapist. Okay, so in the sense of dysthymia, it's like a depressed mood, in the sense of sadness. You're feeling sort of empty, hopeless. You've talked to people. This is what they'll say. They're tearful. I don't know if I have it on here, but yeah, it is on there. Diminished interest or pleasure, most activity of the day, most days. Decrease or increase in appetite, insomnia or hypersomnia. People just say, I'm just going to sleep today. I've just been sleeping, right? You always wonder, do you ever wonder how people sleep all day, right? That's why. And there's other things going on, I'm sure. Either restlessness or slowed down. Okay. This is an important one. Feelings of worthlessness or excessive guilt. Okay, this is one we want to be a little more cognizant of as we go forward in terms of the Buddhist psychology. Okay. And then, of course, diminished ability to think or concentrate, indecisiveness, recurrent thoughts of death. Interesting thing, when those of you who studied psychopathology, how you went through like different disorder, groups of disorders one week, and then like psychotic disorders next week, and mood disorders next week. And did you ever notice, were you like me, where each week you felt you had all of those diagnosed? So if we talk about this enough, I can guarantee you we'll be depressed, right? Okay, so just so we know what we're talking about in terms of depression from modern, when we say the word depressed, we're talking about all this stuff or variables of it or pieces of it. Okay? Now, what's the cause of all this in terms of modern psychology in the modern day? What are the causes? Actual causes are not known. I think that's interesting. So there's a lot of conjecture. And if there's a cause, you'd think it'd be the same cause for everybody. Right? If it's a thing, depression, then the cause should be related, right? The cause has to be related of the same entity in nature as the effect. We say, now I'm going crossing the line into Buddhist thinking. In Buddhist thinking, we, of course, cause and effect is a big topic. So we talk about the effect. I'm going to do this anyway. We talk about the effect. This is why I have some struggle with modern psychology. It doesn't make much sense yet. Hopefully someday it will. But the thing what happened with narrative people, when I studied quite a bit with some of the leaders of it, at least locally, and they don't believe in cause and effect. The reason they don't, I understand, is kind of out of compassion. What happened is they looked at all the, over the years, many, since Freud, and they saw clients or patients having been sort of abused by the system of thought, meaning they were always disempowered, and that part of the power dynamics of it was the professional had a different language, and so for the patient or client to participate, he or she had to learn language, right? That's when we asked this kid, again, back to that 7-year-old, I don't know if it's the same one actually, but I remember asking about his ADHD. And he knew more about it than I did. And I said, where did you learn all that? So he sounded just like a doctor. He did. So he had been one of these people, right? The power dynamics. So that's when we asked, I think it was the same thing. We asked him, well, just tell us what it is. Just tell us what it is for you. What's your experience? I don't get enough attention. We didn't say this. Why do you have all those big words then? That's a really much easier problem to think about than if I were to read the diagnosis to you, which I don't even know anymore, the language. That's complicated language. That's for the professionals. But narrative therapists saw this dynamic happening and saw that the patients or clients were disempowered by the language and the power dynamics. So they looked at it and they said, well, if you look at the causes in modern psychology, this is their thing, and I agree with them, is that the causes were things like, what were the causes of mental disorders? Were depression? What were the causes? Typically, still are. What do the people say? Why are you that way? Why, if you're depressed, let's go back early days. Why was it? What was it related to? Trauma. How about before trauma? What kind of trauma? Lost weather, family, birth. What would the not our idea about it? What were the professionals' idea about it? Oh, come on, you guys. You missed the big one. Huh? Getting there. From whom? Yes. Yes. Freud. I mean, he evolved, but in the beginning, it was like everything was mother blamed, wasn't it? So narrative therapists didn't like that. Then it became family blame. I don't know if then it became family. Then it was like upbringing blame. Then it was alcohol blame. Then it was substance abuse blame. Then it was your social setting blame. Then it was your teachers. And then it was, what I mean? So they just said, well, we just can't deal with that. That doesn't make sense. So that's why they gave up on psychology and they gave up on causes, because they felt any cause you came up with was blaming. So I actually diverge from that. I don't agree with that. I think that's okay when the causes that you're talking about are not really the causes, more what we call the conditions. But if you're feeling depressed Anxious, depressed, sad, angry, jealous. It's very important to understand, to know what the causes are. Extremely important. Not to fixate on them. But if you don't know the causes, you keep creating the causes. Right? If you have an effect, you have a cause. 100%. There's no other way you can be. And we don't think that way, by the way. So I was sitting in this supervision circle at a narrative therapy group that I was part of. I got thrown out of the group after this, by the way. I want to warn you. I did. So in narrative therapy, they talk, because they threw out psychology, the way they would explain it, and I'm not going to do this justice, so please, read up on it. But basically, it has to do with the social constructions a person creates throughout their upbringing. So it's socially created. Okay? Which I think has a lot of truth to it. Although I think I wanted to add more to it. Culturally created, religiously created, all kinds of things, right? But anyway, they weren't going there. They like the social construction. Now this is kind of old. I don't know where they're at today. So I said to my supervisor, the one running the narrative group, I said to him, if you have two twins, I guess you don't have two twins, I guess you have twins, right? If you have twins and they're raised together, hypothetically, I'm not even that hypothetical, raised together, essentially the same social upbringing, social messaging, right? I mean, they have their individualisms, but, let's say they're in a very intact family, secure, all those kinds of things. But one ends up like being a sociopath, and the other is like, whatever, religious person or something. They're very different. I asked them, so how does that happen? Right? Because they don't have causes. What did he say? Anyone who guesses the answer gets an A. Yeah.
Karma.
No, because karma means cause and effect. They don't believe in causes. So how does that happen?
It would be tangential, so just environmental.
Tangential, environmental, but they have their system is that people construct their reality through the social interactions they have. Okay, so if you have two kids,
Social interaction.
yeah, well, the two kids having pretty much the same social interactions. How does one become a sociopath and one becomes a religious leader or something? I don't know, businessman. How does that happen?
So the story they tell themselves about the interaction,
The story they tell themselves about the interaction, but
the makeup they make them.
Inverse.
so what did he say?
It's the same. It's two versions of the same thing.
It's complicated, isn't it? That's why he said it's random. Oh, yeah. I mean, you don't say that to a Buddhist, And this is where I lost my job. I laughed. Not very rudely, probably about like that. Because I was like so shocked. And I said to him, I was sitting next to a door. And I said, so you mean this doorknob could just randomly become a flower? And he said, yes. Because random, there's no cause and effect. It's random. Yeah, that doesn't work for me. And I felt very bad that I think I offended him, obviously, because I did that little laugh thing, and then I was done. But anyway, I told that story for a reason. And the reason is cause and effect is a truth. It's like gravity. It's a truth. It's a truth that we as modern Western people don't believe. We believe in gravity because we're taught gravity it's been injected into the culture. Right? I mean, no one says, do you doubt gravity? No, gravity, it's truth, all that sort of, right? That's from our education and the culture around us. It's a cultural, there's a cultural acceptance. It's a cultural knowledge. with a small k. Okay? Now, in Asia, many parts of Asia, karma is a cultural knowledge too. You don't have to teach karma to Tibetans. And when I say karma, let's get clear. I should just say cause and effect, the law of cause and effect. And of course, many physicists and scientists also believe some level of cause and effect, right? So here, what we're talking, I'll get into it. So, in modern psychology, they talk about the actual cause is not known, maybe severe life stressors. So, you and I go through this. We were both in Florida during the hurricane, life stressor, right? You get depressed and I don't. Well, that doesn't make sense. Life stressor can't be the cause. Condition, yes. Not the cause. Can't be. If it's a cause, it always creates that. That's what we don't understand about cause and effect. If it's a cause, it always creates the same effect. Okay? If you hit a piece of wood, like that, it always makes that noise. Under those conditions. That's cause and effect. So if the hurricane was the cause of depression, I should be depressed too. Okay? So life stressors are a condition. They're not a cause. Okay, we got to get comfortable with the fact that causes and conditions are not the same thing. Now, in our culture, we almost always talk about conditions as causes. Well, he cut me off going over Highway 17. That's why I got angry. Right? The coffee was cold at Pete's, and that's why I didn't leave a tip. They don't deserve a tip, right? If they do good business, you get a tip. Cause and effect. It's not cause and effect, right? It's kind of like that. We do that all day long. Okay. Then there's factors such as genes. Or maybe you have a genetic marker that makes you depressed. Stress. So these are what's called. So if it's stress, I deal with a lot of stress. I get really depressed. Urs is so mellow. I mean, I come in, I stress him out by being almost late. He doesn't get depressed. So is stress the cause? Can't be, right? Brain chemistry. Brain chemistry does and can play a part, definitely. Definitely. And especially with what we're talking about, long-term and severe depression, there seems to be a chemical component, definitely. Is it the cause? That's a different story. Not in Buddhist psychology, not the cause. Doesn't mean it's not tough. It's like if you're in prison and you get depressed, and you get tortured and you get depressed. Pretty hard not to be, right? But it's not the cause. Because there's some prisoners that won't get depressed. And then alcohol and drug abuse. So that's the Western part.
Can I ask a quick question on the previous?
Yeah.
So when you said life stress is not a cause, it's a condition?
Life stress is not a cause, it's a condition.
So on this list,
Mm-hmm.
number 2 is severe life stressor.
Right.
So is this...
Oh, this is from Western modern psychology point of view.
Talking about Buddhism.
Yeah, we're going to get to Buddhist part. I'm not going to stay here very long. I'm not an expert on this anyway. I'm not saying I'm an expert on the Buddhist psychology. This is what modern psychology looks at as causes for depression.
But you're saying that's inaccurate.
I'm saying it's not complete. Yeah, I'm saying those are conditions, not causes.
That list right.
Yeah. That list right there, I'm just repeating because I don't know if the people watching can hear. So that list is not a list of causes. It seems to be from modern psychologists, Western psychologists. If you ask them what are the causes of depression, they'll come up with a list like this. Okay? Thank you. You're welcome. This is from the Dalai Lama. I didn't put that there, and that's not his ideas. He's talking about research because he does a lot of collaboration with scientists. Has done for years. He's fascinated by science. In fact, he said if science proves something wrong or inaccurate in Buddhism, we will take it out. Wow! Can you imagine any religion saying that, or system of thought? That's pretty amazing. That's confidence. And also it's practicality. So they have taken stuff out. There are things that he has said, don't teach that anymore. Like it used to be the world being flat, for example. That's been taught because it's involved in some rituals that we do, where it's a flat earth. So we can do it symbolically, but not to believe that it's flat. And then I don't know, other thing, a few other things, as science integrates with. But one thing that's interesting, and this is worth noting, anything that's been changed or maybe not, or not changed, but taken out or not taught anymore, none of those things were what Buddha himself taught. It was all from the commentaries of the scholars and pundits and contemplatives and things like that. So they often taught, what was relevant for the culture, right? So that's interesting. But His Holiness said that when in his work or his collaboration with modern psychologists, neuroscientists, and things like that, that there is a connection, again, conditions, but a connection between a lack of affection, love, and compassion in the family and community. We don't really see that it's interesting, we might start seeing that more. And we do see it a little more in Western psychology where they talk about attachment theory. Attachment theory, I think, has a lot to do with, like, secure attachment. If we're in an environment with secure attachment, we grow up to be healthier people. And if you look at what a secure attachment seems to mean, it does seem to mean that kind of love, affection, care, security, consistency, things like that. So I think these might be like synonyms for that. Okay? And he often says how we're social animals who need affection. So again, we could go back and I think we could look at a lot of problematic behaviors we know stem from an insecure upbringing or a violent upbringing or violent environment, a chaotic environment, things like that. And then he says, well, when it's lacking or we're deprived of it, we become unhappy and listless. So that's the modern. I like that last part because I kind of sort of bring it more into maybe current thinking and not so much diagnostic, but probably this is where the thinking is for therapists. They're thinking about actually people who are not just theorists, but people who are actually working. So it's interesting when we start thinking about that. If that's related with depression, then as a therapist, what are your interventions going to be? Or even as a parent, and your children are depressed, seem depressed, or friends. And then what does it mean if someone has gone deprived of affection for 20 years as a young adult? They think they never had affection. That's what I want to say. Or they had a very affection deficit environment. It's going to be harder, right? Okay. Any questions coming up? No? Any questions with you guys? No? Okay. Now we make a transition.
So I do have a question, sorry, just to follow up on that last thought. So that perception of not having a loving family or not feeling loved,
Mm-hmm.
is that, can that be changed, or is that always, their perception is always going to be valid?
So
or if they talk to siblings, let's say, and said, oh, we had a very loving...
Happens a lot, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just...
So in case people couldn't hear, you were asking if can it be changed if the perception was sort of a deficit of affection for a long period of time or a period of time as a child? Are you sort of doomed, right? Because that period's gone. It's interesting, even with a theory on secure attachment, which is very nice, that they say you can heal from that by being, for example, it's different. It's not exactly the same as it's not exactly the same as affection, but in the secure attachment, because if you find yourself with a partner, say, who came from a family with secure attachment, and he or she, and you're out of your, long way away from your family origin, so you're not being influenced by that, then that quality of the secure, attached person and what they bring can slowly, you can change. You can, as long as you're open to it, you know. But it will be, anyway, usually you see a lot of conflict and stuff going on between your values and things like that. But that aside, if the person recognizes, yeah, my upbringing was lacking, that was chaotic or was violent or was insecure or whatever you want to say, and I want to be, then with patience, yeah, that person can become more...
They can change themselves,
yeah.
but not necessarily their perception of their past.
No. No, the question was they can change themselves but not their perception of the past. That's a different, I would say they can change their perception of the past, and they can. Oh, definitely. Definitely. So, in fact, that's part of the healing in terms of a Buddhist approach because, well, we'll get to that. Remind me to make sure I address that, okay? Yeah. So, I was thinking about depression, obviously, and I thought, well, of course. There's lots to be depressed about. You know, some people don't like Buddhist approach at first because what's the first thing the Buddha taught?
Suffering.
Very first teaching, the Four Noble Truths. And the first of the Four Noble Truths is the truth of suffering. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of encouragement. They're called the Four Noble Truths. But actually their name is the Four Truths for Noble Ones. I didn't know that till a few years ago. I mean, I just didn't think about it. Why? So a noble one, now I don't know where you guys are at, but I'm going to project where you're at, that you're like me. We're not noble ones. It doesn't have anything to do with money. It doesn't have to do with status. So this is a term that applies to someone who has had perception of reality. Direct perception of reality. Once we have the direct perception of reality, we're then called a noble being or an Arya being. At that point, even though we're not Buddha, we're not enlightened yet, we will never get more confused. We're only going to get more and more out of confusion. We're only going to get more and more enlightened at that point. Before that point, it's still kind of risky. Meaning, you know, this is a kind of advanced topic, but I wanted to say that. So the whole, so we're going to talk about this some more, but my point is a noble being is someone who has realized reality. Now, when we realize reality, see things as they really are, okay, we don't do that now, and we'll talk about that in a minute. We see things differently, okay? So when we see things as they really are, that person has direct perception that everything is in the nature of suffering. So all that we might accept it, like, you know, we're longtime Buddhists, and let's say, and I can say, you know, well, you know about the truth of suffering, and people say, yeah, I know, wow, you know. It's like there's an acceptance, but we still don't actually know it. We're beginning, it's the beginning is to go, not have doubt. That's how it works. First there's doubt, and then doubt becomes less, and then slowly So I think people can get they can understand. Yes, I can see it, but the world and everything is in the nature of suffering. We can probably intellectually we can get it, but we don't have an intuitive insight into it until we have an insight into reality. And the byproduct of having the insight into reality is naturally, not contrived. Naturally, you go, oh my God, everything's in the nature of suffering. You will have that. It's not contrived. You don't have to think about it. You get kind of hit by it. It's overwhelming, in one sense. So then, if these noble beings are telling us this, us who can't quite see it, but we kind of get it, kind of believe it, then why wouldn't things be depressing? That's why a component of the two Buddhist wings are wisdom, seeing reality, and compassion. So when you see reality and see the truth of suffering, if you don't generate compassion, there's something wrong with you. Because you see every living being as incredibly... The word suffering is hard to use, right? But you see them all in nature suffering. You see this huge thing, and none of it's pretty. I mean, there's little bits are pretty. There's few. I mean, there's hope. That's pretty. But just in terms of just what you see in front of you, so your heart just kind of, I was going to say it breaks, but actually it opens. It opens. It's no choice. How can you not have compassion when you see the truth of suffering? Okay? Because it's the same thing as when our kids or our parents, when we do connect with their suffering, right? You don't have to think about being compassionate. Your heart is, you're just automatically, right? You just automatically like spontaneously care, and then you probably do something too, right? Whatever you do, you just that like you don't have to say, "Oh, give her a hug." You don't have to say that. Most people, right? It's just spontaneous, right? So that's what these noble beings. It's like that, but they have much more. They don't. It's not just about hugs, It's like, I need to get you out of your situation. That it's like that. I'm not gonna give up till you're out of it. That's how it feels for them. Lama Zopa Rinpoche once said to a friend of mine, he said, if you saw your rebirth, you wouldn't sleep at night. Although I don't know how many people believe in rebirth, but if you do, you wouldn't sleep. That's what they see. And they don't see it with one person. They see it with everyone they come in contact with. And those they don't come in contact with. I don't know why I'm going off on this. Okay, so why wouldn't that be depressing, right? So if we start thinking about the world and our, and the nature of suffering, now it's not only suffering, but that's the predominant theme. That's the overwhelming vibration. Okay? And all human beings are born and live with three. So sometimes they talk about, now when I talk about suffering, I'm talking about also animals. And even celestial beings, if you believe in those. Angels and those kinds of things. And even spirits and ghosts, if you believe in those kinds of things. Well, you don't have to believe. They do. I'm saying you might not believe in that's okay. And then there's even hell beings. Okay? So human beings, in fact, human beings and animals, for example, we sometimes talk about, our condition. So when I'm talking about this, I don't want to talk about suffering as something intellectual. It's something we're in. Okay? Right now. And so this is what's important, because what the Buddhists are saying is, we're not talking about being in Hurricane Irma. That's bad. But not being in Hurricane Irma doesn't mean you're not suffering. So there's something else they're talking about. That's why Arya beings, noble beings, see it and we don't. Because we don't quite get it. If you are sitting here going, yes, I'm sitting here in the nature of suffering, then you get it. But most of us are not. I mean, other than maybe our knees hurt, or right? Or Karuna's going on too long, or I wonder if they're going to have a tea break, I really have to go to the toilet, I'd rather be home watching, what's on tonight? Anything on? I know Game of Thrones, sports, 49ers. So that's not what they're talking about, unfortunately. I wish it was that easy. Okay. So when they're talking about suffering, just one way of talking about it is, they talk about that there's 3 levels. And the first level all of us are in touch with. It's just called pain. Okay? We're not in pain necessarily all the time. It comes and goes. But we are susceptible to pain all the time. Right? You know what I mean? Take a pin and touch it to any part of your body. What happens? That's pretty amazing. That's like, if someone said you're carrying a bomb with you, you'd freak out. Or I don't know. But all you need to do is take a little pin. I was picking something up yesterday, and where was I? Can't remember where was I. Picking something up, and a splinter went into my fingernail. Right? And I thought about that. I mean, I thought about it. It hurt. So some tiny thing. I mean, there's hardly any part of your body you couldn't put a splinter and it wouldn't hurt. Is there any? You know, bones maybe don't have nerves. Do bones have nerves? Yeah, they do. Okay, let's see. Teeth. Maybe your fingernail? Under the fingernails. You know what I mean? Anyway, you get my point. So if we're that way, wouldn't you say you're in the nature, just that one alone, wouldn't you say you're in the nature of suffering? If someone's carrying a bomb on their back and they don't see it, and you look at him, wouldn't you say, whoa, he's in the nature, he's in suffering, he's in danger. Well, danger is like not good, right? So we're like kind of in not good. And we don't even, now, okay, so then the second one is more subtle, which is the suffering of change, or the difficulty of change. I sometimes try and say we're away from the word suffering because people don't like it. The problem of change, problem. The problem of change is these are unconscious sort of things, is that when we reach for the water, we don't think of that as suffering. Why? Because we don't get that this, needing to have a drink is in the nature of a problem of change. Why? Because I'm going to need a drink a little while later. So I'm not in control. That's why it's suffering. It's going to come back. If you eat a nice meal, how much actual pleasure, happiness do you get from eating a meal? We project, oh, that's great. That's great. What do people like? What do people like to eat? Sushi? Like everyone has a favorite thing. Pizza. Yeah, pizza's great. It's great for everybody, right? No. So pizza. So you think about that. The nature of change is that we see there's happiness in the pizza, don't we? I can't wait to get home and have that pizza. And how long is the happiness last? Yeah, you almost can't even find it, can you? And then if it's really happiness, you eat more of it and you get more happy, right? No. So we're hypnotized. That's why it's called the suffering of change. It's because we're hypnotized constantly into thinking our happiness comes from something that's in the nature of change. And we're changing too. So there's no real, it never stops. I mean, it never endures. And also, the other part they talk about, all these things that we do, right, we're constantly confused. Because, like I was at a retreat last month with a large group of people, and the difficulty in the air conditioning system. It would have been fine if people knew that they would never be happy with it. But you think, I can make it right for me, right? And then what would happen? They get too hot. They get too cold. It's okay, but the attitude going into it is of fixation. We have fixed perception. That's the problem. And that fixed perception, when it's in the nature of change, is suffering. We're stupid. We're actually like that, like stupid. Then we call that suffering, okay? That's stupidity, because we're constantly hypnotized by it. Always, always, always. I mean, every day. Not all through the day. Okay? So if we kind of said, yes, everything's in the nature of change, I'm not going to be tricked by the pizza. I mean, I'll enjoy it. But we don't do that. We're tricked into not seeing the change. The third one is hard to kind of sometimes grasp. Pervasive, compounded suffering. What that means is that we are just set up for it. We're not out of it. We're walking around. Basically, kind of means ignorance. We don't know reality. And because we don't know reality, we take rebirth after rebirth after rebirth. And don't worry if you don't believe in rebirth. That's okay. You can just think in terms of day to day. It's like you get up tomorrow, it's the same thing. You thought you conquered it, but you didn't. You thought you were free of problems. I figured it out, right? It's like golf. You always hear this with golfers. I figured it out. The swing. Yeah, I figured out what I was doing wrong. It never ends, does it? That's the nature of pervasive suffering. Is we are, our minds are in the nature of suffering. Okay, and our body is. We talked about the body. It's just in that. We're not free. That's what I was saying. We're not free. We're not in control. That's pervasive suffering. We're not in control. Anything can happen anytime. Okay? Even that's related also with change, but also it's the reason that change can cause so much suffering or problems is because we are in the nature of it. Our minds are in the our minds are not free, so anything can happen. That's that condition of anything can happen as a person or a living being. That's pervasive, compounded suffering. Okay? Yes.
Don't we choose not to focus on that? I mean, like death is going to happen to us any second in your grief, lesson. But we don't focus on that. We focus on the temporary happiness.
Yes.
We do have
It doesn't work. Sorry. We do have temporary pleasure.
pleasure.
Pleasure is sometimes, I mean, people do have some happiness, but it's very tentative. It's very delicate, isn't it? The fact that we live in that delicate state, that's the third one. Okay? I'm unsure what you're saying about death, though. I may have missed that part.
Oh, you were saying we don't know when something's going to happen.
Right.
Anything can happen.
Anything can happen anytime.
Like death. And I was
Like
thinking,
death.
we don't think that, there could be an earthquake right now.
You're right. That's the
A
problem.
hurricane.
That's a problem.
So we're avoiding thinking
Yeah.
about it? Is
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
the
definitely.
reality of it?
Yes. Well, we avoid thinking about it, and we also are ignorant. And when I say ignorant, it's not knowing. We don't perceive it. Awakening being, like those guys or women that see reality, they see death right now. They see it all the time. I mean, it's a reality because it is a reality. They see reality, and which are many levels of reality, many components. One of the components is that you can die anytime. And people do, when we die, is at any time. It's a surprise. And some people die from sickness, but the point is, they're still surprised. My dad died at 88. He's a really healthy guy, but he had a heart attack. He had a defect in his heart. And I just remember my mother saying, I've said this to in some classes, it was so painful. So painful. She's holding, I think, his feet, saying, this wasn't the way it was supposed to be. This wasn't our plan. So death is not easy. And that's because of pervasive compounded suffering. Yeah. It's depressing, isn't it? See? It's depressing. If you choose depression. Yeah.
So what about what they call people who are fatalists or hypochondriacs?
Fatalists or
Think
hypochondriacs?
that earthquake's going to happen any moment. I know it's going to happen any moment all the time.
Right. Yeah, it's out of balance. And we have more than just this stuff. Sorry. We're just on the suffering kick right now.
That's minor then.
Well, we haven't talked about the cause of suffering. Okay? We're talking about the conditions. But I haven't talked about the cause yet. So the person who's fatalistic or always worried about earthquakes doesn't understand the whole cause and effect thing. Okay? We have to understand to get out of depression, to get out of neurosis, to get out of paranoia, to get healthy. We have to understand all the components that get us there. This is not, I haven't even gotten there yet. Okay? I haven't got to the psychology, have I? We're not talking psychology yet. We're just I just thought I'd set the stage that this is our condition. Or this is what we live in. This is our world. Do people need any break or anything? Yes? No? Yes? How many people need a break? 2, 3. Why don't you take one on your own? And I'll wait a second or so, and we'll see if anyone has any questions. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. If you have to stretch or go to the restroom or whatever, yeah. If people have any other just comments? Did you need a break also?
Oh, in a minute.
Okay, so you're okay. So we'll just keep going because I think there's people online also, right? Did they say they needed a break? Oh, yes.
You mentioned that in Buddhism there is no such definition as depression.
Right.
How do they
Call it?
call it?
Yeah. So the question was, in Buddhism, Buddhist psychology has no definition of depression. Yeah. And so how do they deal with that? Well, it's kind of, I'm not sure exactly how to answer that. But when we think of depression and what I know about those indigenous cultures, they didn't seem to do depression like we do in this culture. It doesn't mean they didn't have sadness. Of course they did. It didn't mean that they didn't have suicide, and suicide being maybe one result of depression. So they must have had some. But the way they, what I'm going to talk about, you'll see. And they have that sort of at the forefront of their understanding about problems. I'm not saying they're enlightened beings and all that stuff, but it's just sort of built into their culture. So in Buddhist psychology, though, we have a way of explaining depression, of course, and we're going to do that. It just didn't seem to be one of the major afflictions that got outlined. Isn't that interesting? For example, jealousy did get outlined, did get articulated as one of the major afflictions, mental disorders. But sadness wasn't. Fear wasn't. Interesting, huh? Even fear. And fear is a pretty predominant mental affliction, seemingly. It didn't mean that they didn't have it. It just, they explained things slightly differently. And then we'll get into that. Of course they had fear, Yeah. But, yeah. So let me see if that answers as we go forward. Let me see if that's this slide. Okay. So, we don't see these things, do we? There's a lot of things we don't see. This is some of the things we don't see. So I put this up as stop being tricked. Meaning things aren't that good. Doesn't mean you have to be negative, and depressed. But, things are very tenuous. They're very tenuous. They're very fragile. Okay? If we really are living with part of reality is that our death is imminent. There's many more factors supporting our death than supporting our living, aren't there? But we don't think about that. We don't. If you're like me, we go through our day, we never think about it. We never think that, a stroke is right there. A heart attack is right there. Right? An earthquake is right there. A car accident is right. You think when people who die in car accidents didn't think that it just happened in a second? I mean, do you think, oh yeah, it's a plan? It's not a plan. They don't know. Just like that. But we don't live our life that way. And it's not meaning the person who does live their life that way is not depressed, by the way. It's interesting. They're happier. Because they really have some insight into life. Okay? That's the interesting thing. Okay? But some people, of course, obsess in a wrong way, and then they get agoraphobic. They can't leave their homes or whatever. There's a reason for that, and we got to understand the whole thing. So we'll try and get to it. Okay, now the Buddhist psychological point of view. Mind is chief. Okay? Mind is chief. So all starts from mind and then, feeds into different areas. So So that's the truth, and we don't see the world that way. Lama Zopa Rinpoche does see the world that way. Dalai Lama sees the world that way. Lama Yeshe sees the world. What it means is they see reality, and one of the qualities of the reality is that, qualities of reality is the mind is the main thing. So in the hurricane, I was in North Carolina, so we did have the effects. It was a tropical storm when it got there. It was intense, But what do you think, if you asked, I think Rinpoche, Lama Zopa Rinpoche said, if mind is chief, then the mind, or minds, created the hurricane. The elements were the conditions. Try dealing with that. How does that work? Doesn't mean the elements don't matter. You've got to be very clear on this. They're interdependent. But the way we are, this is really intense, because the way we are as modern people is, we might even say interdependent. The pressure went here, and the global warming, and the seas were warm, right? All that. Those are the conditions. But we never, ever, ever have one of those conditions, interdependencies, to be the mind, do we? What created the hurricane? We're talking about all external. In Buddhist psychology, in Buddhist philosophy, that is impossible. And it can be explained logically. Okay, not that it's easy, but it's logic-based. We have to have, everything is reason-based. We do have faith, but faith is from the point of view of reason-based. You can still find some logical support for faith. Okay? For example, these teachings on cause and effect. In the beginning, you kind of have to have faith, and you're going to go study it. If you just reject it outright, then you're not going to be able to research it. So isn't that amazing? That takes guts to talk about a hurricane that has a mental component. And it's not even a component, it's chief. Wow. So who created the hurricane? We did, yeah. We don't think like that, do we? So who created depression? Who created depression? We did. Oh, I don't know. People don't want to... I'm going to get fired for sure.
People don't want to hear that, but...
No, they don't. But do you want...
But it's empowering.
It's empowering. I even appreciate you saying that. People don't want to hear it, but it's empowering. People are empowered by it when they get sick and tired of problems and trying every way we can to solve them. It doesn't mean that if you have a problem with cold coffee that you can't put it in the microwave. We're not talking about that. We're talking about life, human problems, or living being problems. We're talking about the big P problem, not the cold coffee. Okay? Now, the cold coffee where the person gets depressed and pissed off at the person who's sort of... That's the problem we're talking about. That mind. That's an unhealthy mind. Okay? We're talking about unhealthy minds. That's exactly what we're talking about. And we're talking about that the solution to all those suffering stuff I was talking about is the mind. That's the beauty, actually. It's positive. I have clients that come and I have a problem because I can't talk to them about this. Other clients I can. They get it. I love that. And for me, because I'm not so skillful, right? It's hard for me to talk about a problem that's viewed as externally created and feel effective. Because it's not going to, well, you can do little, you can help, temporarily, right? You know, if someone doesn't have water and is thirsty, then you make water. That's not the problem. I don't want to deal with people's thirst. I want to deal with what makes them thirsty to begin with. It's kind of like that. I'd love to be able to work at that level. Yes, Jandy.
Oh, I was wondering if we could, I mean, to help me understand what you're saying, I'm trying to think of like the media mind and how much energy was put into, like, it's a category 4, and I just worked everybody up into a frenzy, but then it actually did damage. So but I know we have a choice in the response to that damage, but the actual creation, I'm having a hard time thinking of it unless you think of community mind or a media mind.
Well,
that's
media
whipping up
mind.
the story and creating a bunch of hullabaloo about it, so everybody's panicking and.
Well, yeah. I don't. A media mind is an interesting term. I don't think of it quite that way, right?
Is it the way our own mind works, but just in a bigger way?
Well, what happens is you have mind, I have mind. We all, and we're in, like the people in this room. Why are we here and not that guy over there? It's the same reason why people were in the hurricane and others weren't. We're not autonomous beings. Okay? So we've created a lot of stuff together. And that's going into a little bit more advanced, but I'm not there yet. But things happen collectively because collectively we have had experiences together that leave imprints on our consciousness. See, it's all mind. And you and I created similar imprints that we're sitting here together, along with everybody else. The other people aren't here. Why? Why aren't the other people here? Why aren't they an object of our experience? So right now, because we're not, it's tough, man. It's hard to explain, but it's hard to grasp. For the person who views reality, let's turn around. We're getting there. It's in the slides here. For the person, for us, we are seeing everything as if it's out there and non-mental. Aren't we? I see you sitting there, red jacket, black t-shirt, white shirt, glasses. It's all form, right? Do you know for the awakening person, he doesn't see it that way, or she doesn't see it that way? Because what's the component that we're not seeing in all this? Mental. There's a mental component, a big one, in this experience we're all having right now, and we don't see it. We don't know that. We don't perceive that. We see everything as just physical, external, objective, right? It's not. It's also subjective. Subjective means mind. Yes, Bill?
I was just going to say that you could couch it in physics, where when we view things as separate, that's sort of the old-fashioned Newtonian view of nature. There is me and there is stuff, the world.
Right.
Dualistic. Or the Buddhist way is really quantum mechanical.
It is.
It's all impacting on everything. It's one field.
Yeah, and the field that hasn't really, it's just starting to reach quantum physics is the mental field. And its only Dalai Lama is in regular dialogue with quantum physicists. Gee, I wonder why. Okay, they have a long way to go still, but Buddhism has physics, and this is all described in these texts. But it's fantastic that science is a discipline that we have, because they'll get there. I believe they'll get there. It's in its infancy. There's no doubt. I have no doubt that. I mean, gosh, you think about science. This level of science has been around, 100 years or something, or 150 years. That's nothing. Think about another 150 years. I think it would be very, phenomenal. I think, anyway. Okay, so go on. Can I go on? Yeah. Yeah, so it's just a big, ugly setup. We have to become familiar with, we have to become really, when you leave here, if you haven't already, become more familiar that we go from one problem to the next. That's what we do. Now, how we experience the problems, how we, level of suffering with the problems is a different story. Lama Zopa Rinpoche had a stroke some years ago. He got paralyzed. Did he have a problem? The problem was that thing. Did he suffer? I don't believe he suffered at all. Because suffering is a mental experience. Okay? This is where all that suffering stuff I was talking about before, put it in the context that it's all mental relationship. So, if your mind relates to it differently, you don't suffer. The problem for us, what I was describing before, is our sort of default, because we haven't trained the mind. I'm generalizing, but we haven't trained the mind, so we are just kind of like those, those seeds, those flowery seeds that fly through there. What are they called? The dandelion. Yeah, we're like that. Okay? Go from one problem to the next. Get comfortable with that as a theory, or as a actually, doesn't. Now you can get depressed, but why would you get depressed by that, though? This is where we get to depression.
Expectations.
What is depression, right? Okay. So we don't even know the simple truth of things. Nothing lasts, but we never go to that pizza as if it doesn't last. Sorry. Someone can say to you, when I was coming, yeah, people can say to you that, sorry, there's only one slice left. But that's not even, nothing lasts, right? But we rarely approach, when you go on vacation, before you go, do you think about how it doesn't last? Kind of ruins the thing, doesn't it? But it doesn't really ruin it. But yes, we think it ruins it. Do you ever when you go into a nice dinner, do you ever see the end of the dinner? And you're driving home? Why not? It's part of the reality of it. Lama Yeshe used to say, he said, you Western people, he said to me, he always said to other people too, he said, you don't even know how to make a cup of tea. What he meant was, and he'd make it, and he'd drink it, and he'd look like it was blissed out. So, he wasn't because he knew nothing lasts. Right? So he could transform it. Rather than being stuck, he transformed it into something else. But when we're stuck on it being this thing, we have no freedom. He was free. And he used to say, I don't know about you Western people, you have such beautiful things, but you don't enjoy them. And they would say, well, you told us, it's all attached. He said, no, you have beautiful things in the West. You have beautiful, He told my wife, we're living in Nepal in a really dusty monastery. It was late 70s, early 80s. It's pretty rough. And she would wear, like a lot of women did, pretty covered, because they wouldn't show a lot of skin and stuff like that. She was wearing that Gandhi khaki stuff. It's not very attractive. And he said to her, why do you dress like that? He knew why, He said, I want you to wear makeup. You should get, eyeshadow like that, and put lipstick on, and wear, wear a dress. She wasn't that enthusiastic. He says, no. He said, everybody loves beauty. Why won't you offer them beauty? It's interesting, huh? He says, just don't be attached. When you offer to other people, by the way, your attachment goes low. Interesting, huh? Yeah, so don't, we're extreme. So nothing lasts. Things don't satisfy. If that pizza satisfied Bill, he would never have to eat another piece again, right? And you haven't, right? Do you see what I'm saying? It's a mindset where we're going in. When I come to this water, I'm not thinking it doesn't satisfy. I'm it's there's a fixed expectation that this will satisfy me. It's funny. Of course, when we intellectualize, we know it won't, right? But that's not what we're talking about intellectually. We're talking about how we function. And we're always going into things like they're going to satisfy us. I'm going to go to breakfast tomorrow. You think it's going to satisfy. Why are you going to breakfast? Your expectation is it's going to satisfy. My expectation too, by the way. Not any different. So, things don't exist the way they appear. It's number 3. That's the biggest one. And one of the things that doesn't exist the way it appears is our identity. So this is going to more advanced, but I want to present it to you because we're trying to get to depression. So when someone is struggling with depression, what is their experience about around this first bullet point? Everyone here has been depressed, I'm guessing. Maybe not everyone, but generally it's not that uncommon. How does it feel to you?
You're stuck.
Permanent, doesn't it? Stuck. Helplessness. It truly shows up as something that lasts forever. And when that thought comes into our head, which it will, that's where depression gets more depression. It feeds depression, doesn't it? Because that's the hopelessness. And you know what? So one thing is, that's not reality. Depression lasts forever is not reality. Because these are all have to do with reality. If a person is depressed and the thought of it lasts forever and he or she knows that's just a trick, what do you think happens to the depression? It lightens. It softens. Okay? The depression doesn't exist the way it appears either. It appears, how does it appear? Depression.
Heavy.
Heavy, yeah. What else?
Painful.
Painful. Total. Concrete. Blinding in the sense of you can't see anything. It's totally
Isolating.
very isolating. It doesn't exist that way. Those are effects of thinking it exists that way. Do you know that? That's what I mean. When you think it's like that, that is the effect. I've had a number of clients. I find depression, unless it's real, heavy clinical chemical based depression. I think there is a category for that, and I think that needs a different approach. But I don't think most of what we're talking about in terms of depression is what we're talking about. Here, I think I was asked to do this topic in part because of how people were feeling about the political situation. Depressing, isn't it? Oh, sorry. Some people might be encouraged. And I don't want to offend anybody. And there's people watching. I mean, from my point of view, most of what I hear, and here we are in California, in this liberal area, people feel pretty... Some people felt discouraged and depressed, kind of depressed. So that's what we were talking about. But even, yeah. That's interesting, isn't it? Some people don't feel depressed, do they? Why?
They define it differently.
They define it differently, yeah. Okay, so last one I did say this. Our identity is totally misconceived also. Okay? If there's depression, guess what? There's a depressor. Isn't there? There's a subject-object. And one of the interesting ways of looking at depression and a lot of different mental disorders or afflictions is depression is a problem to the degree that we believe it's our identity. Depression is a problem to the degree that it's fused with our identity. And it never fuses with it. It's as we think it does. But then the way to get more depression is to have a dialogue, an experience, people around you who contribute to it fusing more with who you are. Totally wrong view, by the way. Never, ever, ever is our identity depression. Impossible. It's impossible. You have a subject and you have an object. The object is depression. So to have an object and have a subject, they're mutually exclusive. Doesn't mean there's not an interrelationship, right? Of course. You know, this is our problem in life. Am I thirsty? Yes or no? How many say yes, you are thirsty? Yeah, you guys are learning. I'm not thirsty. Yeah, but that's our problem. I think I'm thirsty. If I was thirsty, how could I perceive the thirst? They often use the example. The candle can't illuminate itself. You know, a candle can't see the candle. A mirror can't see itself. Here you go. That's all you need to know. The depression will go away. And then, yeah, you can leave. It's true, but there's something else. There's more going on, isn't there? So depression is a mental event. So just to map it out for you, I'm not going to go into heavy psychology, but I will tell you this much. It's only this one slide, I think. Yep. Well, no, there's two. I don't want to lie. But just to understand the psychology, what is the mind made up of? We could talk about the mind in different ways, by the way, but this way is sort of the traditional map of the mind. Okay? Number one. I don't have that slide here, I just realized, so I'm going to do it for you. So the mind is either form or formless. There's no other one. In other words, it's either atomic, molecular, or it's not. I don't think there's a third choice. So this is, by the way, in modern psychology, you don't get this. They don't even psychologists, student or studier of the mind, the psyche, right? What's your degree in?
I have a master's in counseling psychology.
Okay, so counseling psychology, so you studied psychology, right? So psychology, psyche means mind, right? And you too, also?
I'm a therapist in a different way. I'm a vision therapist.
Oh, yeah.
I have several degrees in,
In psychology as well?
Yeah.
Okay, so you studied psychology. Who else studied psychology? Jandy studied psychology.
Well, a little different.
Okay, I might excuse you. We'll see. Who else, Jandy?
Excused.
Clinical psychology.
Yeah. Anyone else? I already asked you this, I think, a couple times. So clinical psychologist, right? So that means you're a student of the psyche, a studier of the psyche. So, and then I guess when we're psychologists, we're also, for lack of a better way, we're also kind of an expert on the psyche, right? Because then we go do psychotherapy. We therapize, we treat the psyche. So if I'm a heart surgeon or a heart specialist, I treat the heart, right? And I could probably ask anybody here, what's the heart? And we say, that organ, etc. So what's the psyche? They taught you in that, right? Because you spent 2.5 years getting your degree, or 3, and then you got the title psychologist. Me too. I got a clinical psych degree, and I'm a psychotherapist. So how many classes did you have where they defined the psyche to you, the mind? Really? I know they didn't. I always say this. People know me well. I think that's pathetic. I think it's like criminal. We should be called something else. Like counselors and coaches and helpers and things like relationship helpers. But we should not be called psychologists or psychotherapists. How can you be called that if you don't have a definition of the mind and it was never given to you? And if it was given, then someone else doesn't agree with that, right? Because they're talking about, and it's really weird when you think of it. I think it's weird, but that's my little soapbox. And I'm never going to stop saying it until they come up with a definition that they agree on. Okay? So the mind is not form. Form means atomic, right? Molecular. Form in Buddhist philosophy and science is anything that can be perceived with the 5 senses. Okay? That's one way of talking about it. So sights are form. Smells are form. Things you touch are form. They're all made up of molecules and atoms, interestingly enough. So you can say anything made up of atoms is form. So the big revelation for me was sound. I always thought sound must be formless. But it's made of waves, right? And the waves are made up of molecules and things like that. So those are the 5. So there's 6 consciousnesses or mind, qualities of mind that go with each one. So my eye, this eye, sees sights. And the sights are experienced by the eye or seeing consciousness. Not my smell consciousness. My smell consciousness can't see things. My smell consciousness smells is the interaction, it's the interrelationship between my nose, the odor, and then there has to be a consciousness who experience it, right? Those 6, and then the 6th one is mental consciousness. And the mental consciousness, one way you can understand it, is when you're dreaming at night. Who's experienced that? Who that experience is through the mental consciousness, or daydreaming, things like that. Okay, but when it's one of the 5 senses, then that's also experienced by mind. Consciousness and mind are synonyms, and so that's what happens is that we experience it through our mind. Okay, and that mind part is not atomic, not molecular, not form. Just to jump ahead, that's why the brain is not the mind. The brain is form, right? It's cells and nerves and gray matter and all that stuff. Doesn't mean there's not a relationship. Of course there's a relationship. Just like there's a relationship between seeing something in our eye. Okay? But if it's atomic, it's not the mind. Mind is formless. Okay? Let's get that straight. Yes?
Sorry for maybe unrelated question. So someone with a brain damage does not have mental consciousness.
Someone with brain damage does not have mental consciousness. Someone with brain damage still has mental consciousness, yeah. Yeah. Someone in a coma has mental consciousness. Yeah. In fact, a living being never doesn't have mental consciousness. There's impairment because the organ isn't working, which it's dependent on an organ. It's like our eye. If we have a damaged eye, we're going to see things, incorrectly or in a damaged way. Same thing with the mental consciousness. Yes.
So So wouldn't it make the mind fiction then? Because if the sight, sound, taste, smell, tactile, mental are biochemically based or cell based or hormone based or whatever, then wouldn't the mind become a mental event that we create? And then so thus it would, because it's formless, you could say it's fiction.
Well, formless, why does something formless have to be fiction?
Well, it doesn't, but I'm just trying to...
Not for me, it doesn't. Is space fiction?
Like, who created the mind?
Ah, I don't know. Who created the mind is the question. I don't know. But it was created by you and me. And it constantly recreates itself. But,
So it's very pliable.
well, it's formless. Of course it's pliable, right?
Very pliable, yeah. And changing.
Changing all the time. But I wouldn't call it a myth. Myth means something that doesn't exist, right? A myth is something that exists as a myth. Let's put it that way.
But we decide that it's real, right? So we're deciding it's real and deciding it's not a myth.
We're deciding it's real. We're deciding it's not a myth. What's a myth? What's your definition?
Mind is deciding a mind exists.
I mean, if I decide my mind doesn't exist, it doesn't exist?
I don't know. I'm asking.
Not for me. I'm still experiencing things, aren't I? No matter what I decide.
But maybe you're experiencing them through your brain and not your mind. So it's a biochemical experience.
Well, who's the experiencer? The question was, maybe I'm experiencing it just biochemically. There's biochemicals going on, right? There's chemical reactions going on, right? Who's experiencing them?
The individual.
They can't. The biochemicals can't experience themselves. So there's some subject experiencing the biochemical reaction, right? What is that? Think about it, okay? Think about that, okay? So in this description, we have the six, we have a mind, and we put little functions as like, there's a mental consciousness, there's a smell consciousness, there's a taste consciousness, there's a hearing consciousness, etc. 6 of them. Then, but that doesn't explain like when I get angry, that doesn't explain when I get jealous, that doesn't explain all those experiences. Those are what we call the 51 mental functions or mental factors. Now we have a full experience. Okay? I'm not going into detail, but it gets much more detailed than this because we have a complete psychology. But just so that we have little tiny explanation, because we're going to... Okay. So how does all this work? So depression is a mental event. So depression, is it mental or physical? That's what I'd ask you. Is depression mental or physical? Now that we have everything's either one or the other. It doesn't... It's mental. We say, I feel sad. Right? Doesn't mean there's not a relationship with the physical. Don't get me wrong. Like if Bill hits me in the face, and then I get angry, the anger is mental, but there's a relationship where he hit me, right? So it doesn't mean these things. It's your I took his pizza. It doesn't mean these things are independent. Don't get that. There is interdependency. There is not a mind without an interdependent relationship with the world. You can't have a mind by itself. That's a big one. Without something else. There's an object. For us. Normally. Regular minds. Okay? It's always an experience. The mind is always experiencing. That's what's phenomenal. Even in a coma. Even in your deep sleep, the mind is still experiencing. You're just not aware of it, nor am I. But meditators can be aware of it. When our minds get very clear, and we get very focused, and we get very trained, those are things they can do. That's why it's so unbelievable to train the mind. It's real happiness, not this other stuff, like pizza. For those... It's really kind of amazing. For those beings, I believe, I'm not just saying this on faith, well, of course, a little bit of faith, but having been around them, and it seems they have these qualities, so I'm just saying, it's not like they say, oh, I'm enlightened, or I'm awakened, or I'm going to be a Buddha soon. Or they don't say that, of course not. Or my focus is really good. I'm a good meditator. We don't. If they say that, run away. Seriously, and some people will say that. Don't trust it. It could be true, but I don't know. Where was I going with that?
How the mind is real happiness.
Well, it is, yeah. Oh, the pizza.
Interdependent with the object.
It is interdependent with the object. Oh, so depression is a mental event. Doesn't mean that, of course, I mean, actually almost for sure, when someone enters into depression, that there wasn't some interconnection with something physical through the five senses. Now, it could have been purely mental, but it's pretty much a mental event anyway. But, for example, someone's finds their partner decides to leave them after 12 years. I had a client recently, he left his wife after 31 years. That's amazing. Anyway, is there depression? Yes. If she would just be more supportive of me, I wouldn't be depressed. Right? That's how we go. That is common vernacular, that's common dialogue, it's common narrative, isn't it? And it gets worse. I mean, there bad things happen in the world. But remember, we already talked about it at about 5 after 8. There's always bad things. That's the problem. Don't be surprised when these terrible, sad things happen. Don't be surprised that, we lost our home in a hurricane. We should know better. We have no control. Depending on our imprints, we're going to experience that or not. That's the only control we have. But then, of course, we have lots and lots from the past that we don't know about. Okay? What we do have control about is whether we interact with depression or not, or anger. And we don't have total control until we exercise it. So I know what I was going to say before, is I've had clients that were Buddhist and were going through a depressive episode. And it was just so, what's the word? It was so touching to work with them. Because I'm talking about 2 or 3, they all got out of it. Over time. And so it's not like, oh, I'm Buddhist now, I'm depressed. Oh, tomorrow I won't be, because I know. A very advanced Buddhist practitioner could get rid of it very quickly. But us regular people who are just trying. So they all said the same thing in different ways. They all said, I hope this depression doesn't leave completely. Isn't that interesting? Why would they say that?
Because then would make the other state pathological, sort of.
So we make the other state pathological, the healthy state, you mean?
I think it's a path to wisdom.
Yeah, it was because they learned so much. They grew so much. Because they had a relationship with the experience that I believed in personally, so I was kind of... they did too. They all I was reminding them, because that fogginess that depression will do. So, it's courage to engage with depression. We're not talking about the treatment in this, we'll do that next class. About how we relate to, what do we do? They all did it. And they all reduced it, or got rid of it. Pretty much got rid of it. And they all said, wow, I don't know if I really want this to leave completely. Because the amount of wisdom and growth. And this kind of wisdom is happiness. From when we talk about what is happiness, it's wisdom and compassion. They became more compassionate to others, to themselves too. So their heart opened and their wisdom opened. And it worked. I mean, that works as a formula for happiness. So it's really reaffirming. See, with wisdom, things don't, and compassion, for example, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, he's my role model. So he, to me, has wisdom and compassion. I mean, fully developed. And I've told this story many times about, he was visiting with Lama Yeshe. Lama Yeshe was live in those days at this period, and they went out to, there's one student in Boston who had a summer house or a weekend house on the lake. And it was actually near Walden Pond, but anyway. And so they went out there for, a couple-day break. And there were several people there, and decided to go swimming in the lake. And then, they're splashing around, doing their thing and whatever you do in the lake. And someone commented, where's Lama Zopa? They started looking around. And then my friend Tim, he looked over there. And just above the surface was a hand going like this. And Tim swam over and rescued him. He didn't know how to swim. And it walked on. It got steep, right? And that. And when he brought him, she's laughing. Ha 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 ha. Something. I wasn't there, but no panic. That's the point. That's the main thing that people when they're drowning do, right? Panic. He doesn't have that imprint anymore. So he can't panic, even if he wanted to. If he wanted to, it would just be an act. Interesting. So we can purify all that stuff on our minds that's considered problematic. I won't say suffering. So this on these mental factors or these mental functions, there's 51 of them in this schematic. By the way, don't hang on that this is the truth, but it's a way of understanding. Of the 51, 6 of these are 6 root mental disorders. Those like anger, ignorance, desire, doubt, pride, I think, and wrong views. Don't get hung up on it. This is just what they call the 6 root ones. I hope I didn't get them wrong, but I'm wrong all the time. So, okay, those are root because those are kind of like the predominant. When things happen. Now, what are we talking about? Things happen. Mental imbalance. Imbalance. Now, we're never really imbalanced anyway. But if you start thinking about why, so if you have less ignorance, less anger, less attachment, less wrong views, less pride, and less doubt, more and more as we become less of those, the mind becomes more soft. And Rinpoche probably eliminated all those, so you're drowning, it can't come up. It can't come up. Because it's not there. Okay? Just like some people can't get depressed. It's not there. Okay? Okay, so then there's 21 secondary mental disorders. They're related with the 6 root ones. I'm not going to go into the 21. They're just like jealousy is a secondary one, and I can't think of the others right now. Okay, and then there's 11 virtuous minds in us, just to throw in a good note. Okay, and things like non-harming, warmth, or empathy. Things like that, okay? We have those, but those aren't active in us because they're subsumed, they're covered by these other ones that are usually the negative ones tend to be more active. And as we train the mind, these ones become more active because those other ones get subdued. That's what's very important to understand. And then you get better and better and better, and that's what enlightenment is eventually, when you get rid of those afflictions. And it really, we're talking about a level of, for us too, not just, it's not some pie in the sky. As we train our mind, as we subdue and purify these negative, then things like compassion, warmth, affection, non-harmfulness, those kind of things will rise more and more to the surface. And those are the people you see are happier than us. That's why. And not even, just relatively speaking, amongst our friends. Amongst our friends, how some people are like, wow, he's pretty good person, I like being around him, that kind of thing. That's because those afflictions are more subdued in that person. And that has to do with previous lifetimes really doing this. And guess what? What do you think animals have going on? And people say, oh, well, yeah, animals, they're so, my dog is so sweet. He really knows when I'm sad and he's so compassionate. That might be true, but can you, not focus on your pet? Because pets like that are statistically unmeasurable in the animal realm. Start talking about cockroaches. Start talking about ants. Start talking about barnacles. Start talking about, I read some time ago that in this one area in Canada, during the summer months or summer, there are 12 billion mosquitoes. So don't get fixated on your pet. That is statistically unmeasurable. Or dolphins. Dolphins are, they are. There's something going on. But they don't even measure in the animal realm. What do you think is going on for a mosquito?
Reproduction.
What's going on in the mind of a mosquito? It has mind like us. Not the same quality, but okay. So that leaves 2 minutes to 9. Did I leave you hanging? I hope so. Okay, we didn't quite get finished with the psychology of it, but we're pretty close. And I'll save the rest because it's a bit meaty, the last part. Okay, any questions? We had no questions tonight? Uh-oh. Yes?
Would you say that mind is experience or not quite?
That's a good question. Would I say that mind is experience or not quite? I would say that the primary function of the mind is experience. And I would say, without being technical, I wouldn't want to say exactly it is, but that's a good way of thinking of it, is the mind is experience. But we have to think about, well, how does it experience? What are its components to make experience. So we can look at that a little more. But yes, experience is kind of its primary function. So that's a very good way to work with it. Very much so. The definition of mind is that it's clear. So that means like space. But space is not mind. Why? Because the second component, it's experiences or cognizes. That's the definition. So yes, you can say experiences. Cognize, experience. In this context, same. But it's clear. So like we could say a plant might experience. But we say it doesn't have mind because it doesn't have the quality of clarity in it. But I don't want to go into, but that's how it's described, okay? But most things, so an ant experiences, a mosquito experiences, a barnacle experiences, jellyfish experiences, all those experiencers, that's why they have they have mind. Okay, they have that quality inside of them of clarity and experience, or cognizing. Okay, yeah.
I had a question about, depression being a product of the mind. And so what happens often is that people start to feel guilty or not good enough because they're creating the situation when they're depressed. What would you say about that?
Well, that's where we're going, that's where we're headed here. Yeah, because we haven't really talked fully about how depression functions, and we will get there. I just didn't know how far we'd get to tonight. So that's a lure to make you come back. Or watch online. Anyway, yeah, we'll talk about that. I mean, there's many dynamics that start to happen, and it's not just depression. These are the same dynamics that happen if I get really angry, or the same dynamics I get if I really, become obsessed with somebody, or really the same dynamics happen when I fall in love, those things. So there's not, the dynamics are not really different with depression. But what would make depression different than getting angry is there's a slight way of that we engage with the object.
The symptom is low self-esteem and worthlessness.
Yeah, and that's also the effect. I mean, well, I guess that's a symptom. Those are the effects. But why does someone, the interesting question is, you lose your house in the hurricane, and you get depressed, and your next door neighbor gets angry. So what is that? That's important to know, and there's a way to talk about that. Okay? Anything else? Tired? That's a long time, 2 hours. It's a bit much, isn't it? Yeah, fast? Okay. So when we finish, why don't we just... I was going to do a meditation tonight, but we ran out of time. I will do one or two next time, because it's very important. Because I should give, what I think of as the therapy. Yeah. Buddhists, if you have a psychology, don't you always have a therapy? Is there a psychology without a therapy? A theory of psychology without a therapy? Even Freud did therapy, and he was a theorist. I don't think there is. I don't know. I thought of this. I've been thinking about this. The therapy in Buddhist psychology is mind training. And there's different ways of mind training, different techniques. The primary technique is meditation. Okay? But we mean something very, very specific about that. Although we have hundreds of kinds of meditation, they all have this certain quality, certain guidelines. Okay, so we'll talk about that next time. Because it's the only way to get out of depression, by the way. I think. I shouldn't say that, but it's the only way I know of. Okay? So, before we leave, then just think that we have generated a lot of energy together, a lot of imprints created, people out there in the internet world as well. And so that means for 2 hours we had a lot of experiences, and all those experiences leave imprints on our consciousness. So whether they lead to happiness or sadness depends on the quality of those imprints. So the best way to think, I'm going to experience more and more happiness, is to dedicate those imprints. It's like clothing them in the thought for others. Okay, seriously. So just even for a few minutes, we're always 24/7 working for ourselves, our own happiness, and still we don't have it. So just for 30 seconds, think about the last 2 hours. Think, I'm really, really, really dedicating that time to other beings' happiness. And since I'm part of all living beings, then I'll also get happy from it. So you think about a dedicated mind as opposed to me. I really want to figure this out. I really want to be happy. Don't think about that for just a few seconds. Think, okay, I'm going to do my best to give it away and make others happy. Okay, through my positive imprints, so that then I'm a good, balanced, healthy human being is the one who can help others the most. Okay, so just dedicate like that. All living beings. Okay, thank you. See you. Do you know the date?
The 26th of October.
Thank you. 26th of October.